The last drone feed from inside the country had gone dark 3 weeks before. Not jammed, not shot down, just gone, one by one, each link in the surveillance chain quietly severed until the picture of what was happening inside Iran's borders became a mosaic of gaps. Then, in the space of 72 hours, the gaps closed. Not because anyone filled them in, because Iran filled them in for us. This isn't the story of a country winning a war by proxy. It's the story of what happens when the math finally catches up with the myth. Before we go any further, a word on how this script is built. Everything you're about to hear falls into one of two categories: confirmed, meaning corroborated by multiple open-source analyses, satellite imagery assessments, or official statements; and developing or unconfirmed, meaning credible reporting that hasn't hardened into fact yet. I'll flag every single handoff. You deserve to know the difference. Let's rewind to understand how we got here, because the story Iran has been telling about itself and the story the evidence now tells are not the same story. To understand why any of this matters, you have to understand what the Islamic Republic of Iran built over the last 4 decades and why it built it that way. After the Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988, Tehran looked at its conventional military forces and saw a problem that couldn't be solved by buying more tanks. The problem was simple arithmetic. The United States Air Force could reach any point in Iran in a matter of hours. The United States Navy could project power into the Persian Gulf on any given Tuesday without breaking a sweat. Conventional symmetry was impossible, and everyone in Tehran knew it. So Iran built something else. What they built is called the axis of resistance, and the idea behind it is genuinely sophisticated. Instead of parking 100,000 soldiers on a border, you disperse your power across the region. You invest in Hezbollah in Lebanon. You fund and arm Houthi forces in Yemen. You cultivate Shia militia networks across Iraq and Syria. You develop a ballistic missile arsenal at home that holds American bases and regional capitals at risk. You build a drone program, cheap expendable one-way attack vehicles that can saturate defenses and be replaced faster than the defenses can adapt. The theory of deterrence here isn't about winning a conventional war. It's about making the cost of attacking Iran so high that no one will try. Think about that number for a second. 40 years of investment, 40 years of sanctions-busted procurement, reverse engineering, and indigenous development, all in service of one strategic idea. That idea had a name inside the regime. It was called the forward defense. Push the threat away from Iranian soil by making everywhere else a battlefield first. And for a long time, by the metrics Iran was watching, it was working. Here's the chronological picture. In the years following 2006, Hezbollah fought Israel to a standstill in southern Lebanon and emerged with its prestige intact and its arsenal growing. Iran's influence in Iraq expanded dramatically after the American withdrawal created political space that Tehran moved into with speed and purpose. By 2014 and 2015, Iran-backed forces were the most effective fighting force against the Islamic State in several theaters, and that bought Iran something money couldn't purchase directly: legitimacy, regional necessity, a seat at every table. By 2019 and 2020, the Houthis in Yemen were striking Saudi Aramco facilities with precision drone attacks that briefly cut the kingdom's oil output in half. Half. Not a scratch on the surface, not a press release. Confirmed by satellite imagery and independent assessments, roughly half of Saudi Arabia's oil production, disrupted by drones that cost a fraction of 1% of a single Patriot missile. That's not a nuisance. That's a strategic weapon. The picture Iran was projecting to the world was one of durable, distributed power. You can't kill a network by striking its center. The network is the weapon. Now let's talk about what has actually happened since that picture was painted, because the story changed, and it changed fast, and the direction it changed should stop anyone who's been casually saying that Iran is winning this phase of the regional confrontation. Number 1. Hezbollah. This is where the collapse becomes most visible and most confirmed. For 2 decades, Hezbollah's precision missile arsenal was the crown jewel of Iran's forward defense doctrine. Confirmed estimates put the total rocket and missile stockpile somewhere between 130,000 and 150,000 projectiles at its peak. That number was cited by Israeli military assessments, American intelligence briefings to Congress, and multiple independent research institutions. 130,000 to 150,000 projectiles. Let that land for a second. That's not an arsenal. That's a regional deterrent. That's the thing that made Tehran confident it could absorb pressure, because the cost of escalation was priced into every conversation. That number is not what it was. Confirmed, based on open-source assessments and official statements, Hezbollah lost significant portions of that precision-guided inventory to a sustained Israeli campaign of what officials described as pre-strike interdiction. Trucks crossing from Syria, warehouses in the Bekaa Valley, tunnel infrastructure. The precision weapons, the ones that actually threatened strategic targets deep inside Israel, took disproportionate losses. What remained was volume without accuracy, and volume without accuracy is a different kind of threat. Then came the leadership decapitation campaign, the confirmed killing of senior Hezbollah commanders, including figures who had spent decades building operational networks, removed institutional knowledge that cannot be replaced by Iranian resupply. You can ship a rocket in a truck. You cannot ship 30 years of command relationships, source networks, and operational experience. That's the difference between hardware and capability. And Iran lost capability, not just hardware. That's not a setback. That's a generational wound. Number 2, Syria. Iran spent years, billions of dollars, and the blood of its proxy forces propping up the Assad government. The strategic logic was sound from Tehran's perspective. Syria was the land bridge, the corridor through which weapons, advisors, and influence flowed from Iran through to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Lose Syria, and the corridor closes. Lose the corridor, and the forward defense doctrine loses its connective tissue. The Syrian government has fallen. Confirmed. That corridor is not what it was. Iranian military advisors and the infrastructure they built inside Syria are now operating in a fundamentally altered political environment, one that is, at minimum, deeply hostile to continued Iranian military presence and, at maximum, actively working to expel it. The strategic architecture Iran spent a decade building through Syrian territory is now contingent on permissions it does not have and may not be able to secure. That's not a complication. That's the road home closing behind you. Number 3, the Houthis and Yemen. Here's where the confirmed versus developing distinction becomes most important, so listen carefully. Confirmed. Houthi forces have continued launching ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones at targets, including Israeli territory and commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Confirmed. This has disrupted global shipping lanes and forced significant rerouting of commercial traffic around Africa, adding cost, time, and economic friction to global trade. Confirmed. American and allied naval forces have expended significant quantities of expensive interceptor missiles defending against Houthi attacks. That last point is where Iran's supporters point and say, "See, the strategy is working. You're burning a $2 million missile to shoot down a $50,000 drone." And by one narrow accounting, that's true. It is expensive to defend. But here's the number you don't hear in that argument. The Houthi threat did not bring the global economy to its knees. It inconvenienced it. Shipping rerouted, costs increased. But the industrial throughput of the world's major economies did not stop. The oil kept flowing. The containers kept moving. More slowly, more expensively, but moving. And the American and Allied response to Houthi attacks has, per developing reporting, meaningfully degraded Houthi missile stockpiles, command infrastructure, and the port facilities through which resupply would flow. My own read here, clearly opinion. The Houthi campaign has been Iran's most durable active asset in this period, and it is the one piece of the axis of resistance that is still generating strategic pressure. But it is generating strategic pressure in a context where every other pillar of that axis has weakened or collapsed. A single load-bearing wall does more work when the others come down. It doesn't mean the house is standing. It means the remaining wall is under more stress than it was designed to carry. So, if all of that is the confirmed and developing picture, what does the technical and military reality look like underneath it? Let's talk about what Iran actually has and what it actually doesn't. Iran's ballistic missile force is real. This is not propaganda from either direction. Iran has demonstrated, confirmed by multiple strike incidents with assessments by American, Israeli, and independent analysts, the ability to launch large salvos of ballistic missiles at targets hundreds of miles away. A confirmed strike on an Israeli airbase demonstrated Iran's ability to get a meaningful number of warheads through an integrated air defense system that is among the most capable on Earth. That matters. That should not be dismissed. But here's the number that matters alongside it. Of the missiles launched in that salvo, confirmed reports indicated that the overwhelming majority were intercepted or failed. The ones that got through represented a meaningful intelligence and planning failure. Yes, but they did not achieve the operational effect that a successful strike at that scale should have produced. And after that strike, something important happened. Israel struck back, confirmed. And what Israel targeted wasn't symbolic. Israel struck Iranian air defense systems, specifically radar and launcher components of Iran's S-300 derived Bavar 373 long-range air defense network. That system is Iran's most capable layer of protection against the threat Tehran fears most, a direct air campaign against Iranian territory and Iranian infrastructure. Think about what it means to lose those systems, or to have their capability meaningfully degraded. Iran's air defense coverage is not uniform. It is layered in some locations and sparse in others. Confirmed assessments have noted gaps in coverage over Iranian territory that a sophisticated strike package could exploit. Exactly the kind of gaps that mobile missile batteries and valley terrain try to compensate for, the same compensations we watched fail in pieces in the reference scenario. That's not a hole in a fence. That's the fence coming down. Now let's step inside the Iranian calculus for a moment, because they are not irrational actors, and their behavior deserves honest analysis rather than dismissal. The Iranian leadership looks at the current situation and sees options narrowing in real time. The proxies they spent decades building are weakened. The deterrent architecture they constructed around those proxies is less credible than it was. Direct military action by Iran risks exactly the kind of conventional military engagement they built the whole proxy network to avoid. And yet doing nothing, accepting degradation of the axis without visible response, risks the internal political narrative that the Islamic Republic has maintained for its own domestic audience for 40 years. The forward defense doctrine assumed that the proxies would absorb pressure so that Iranian territory would remain inviolate. That assumption was the load-bearing wall of the whole strategy. If Iranian territory is struck, if Iranian air defenses are visibly degraded, if the corridor through Syria closes, then the proxies didn't absorb the pressure. The pressure arrived at home anyway. And a strategy that has failed at its most basic objective is not a strategy that is winning. Now, I want to be fair to the counter perspective here, because there are serious analysts who look at the same picture and reach different conclusions. Their argument is worth hearing. The argument goes something like this: Iran has survived sanctions, military pressure, assassinations of key scientific and military figures, and regional setbacks before, and it has repeatedly demonstrated a capacity to absorb punishment and continue functioning. The Houthi threat to Red Sea shipping is real and ongoing. The ballistic missile program remains intact. The nuclear program, per developing reporting and statements from international inspection bodies, has continued to advance despite everything, and a nuclear-armed Iran changes the strategic calculus in ways that make every other question in this analysis secondary. By that read, Iran is playing a longer game than anyone is measuring, and the setbacks of the last 12 months are the cost of doing business in a confrontation that is measured in decades, not quarters. That is a serious argument. It deserves acknowledgement, and the nuclear dimension in particular is the wild card that keeps analysts up at night, because if Iran reaches a nuclear threshold, the entire strategic picture changes in a direction that is very difficult to reverse. Zoom out to the global picture, because this story is bigger than the region it's happening in. The Red Sea disruption alone has added measurable friction to global supply chains. Insurance premiums for vessels transiting the area have increased significantly, confirmed. Container rerouting through the Cape of Good Hope adds roughly 2 weeks to Asia-Europe transit times, confirmed. In a global economy that runs on just-in-time logistics, 2 weeks is not a rounding error. It's a structural cost that gets passed to consumers everywhere. The energy dimension is larger still. The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has repeatedly and explicitly threatened to close in the event of direct military confrontation, carries an estimated 20% of the world's seaborne oil. 20%, not of oil traded to Iran's neighbors, 20% of global seaborne oil. Close that strait for a week, and the economic shock ripples through energy prices, industrial costs, and inflation in economies that have nothing to do with this conflict. A hospital in Ohio, a factory in Germany, a fishing fleet in Thailand. All of them are downstream of a decision made in Tehran or in Washington about whether to close or defend a waterway most of their citizens couldn't find on a map. That's the actual scale of the stakes here. And it's the reason that the question of who is winning this confrontation is not an abstract geopolitical quiz. It's a question with a price tag that everybody pays. So let's bring this full circle. What the last 12 months have confirmed is this. The axis of resistance, as a coherent strategic architecture, is in worse shape than it has been at any point since it was constructed. Hezbollah's precision arsenal and leadership depth have been significantly degraded. Syria, the land bridge, has fallen out of Iranian influence. Iranian air defense capabilities have been visibly tested and found to have exploitable gaps. The forward defense doctrine, the idea that Iran could hold threats at arm's length by making the region the battlefield, has failed to prevent pressure from arriving at Iran's own borders. What is still developing, still contested, and genuinely uncertain is this: whether Iran's nuclear program will reach a threshold that resets every other variable. Whether the Houthi campaign can generate sufficient economic pressure to produce political results before it is fully degraded by the ongoing military response. Whether the internal political cohesion of the Islamic Republic is more durable or more fragile than outside observers can accurately assess from open sources. And here's the question I want to leave you with today. Iran built the axis of resistance on one foundational premise: that the cost of confronting Iran would always be higher than any adversary was willing to pay. What happens to a deterrence strategy the moment the adversary demonstrates, in public with satellite imagery and strike footage, that the cost is manageable, that the deepest targets are reachable, that the air defenses have gaps, that the proxies can be dismantled piece by piece without triggering the escalation Tehran promised? The axis of resistance was always a credibility project as much as a military one, and credibility, once visibly damaged, is harder to rebuild than any launcher or radar system. You can resupply a weapons depot, you cannot resupply deterrence. If you want to understand what comes next on the naval dimension of this confrontation, watch the follow-up on what the pressure campaign has meant for Iranian naval operations in the Gulf. That picture is equally revealing and equally underreported. We'll get into it next time.